Hariom, Namaste, welcome. So today I will be going through the Yamas and the Niyamas. So hopefully you've already understood what Ashtanga is, the larger context of the terms Yamas and Niyamas. But the Yamas and Niyamas are actually their own method or guide of living, of how to relate to yourself and how to relate to others. And they're very early in the path of yoga because there's a real need to put yourself in the right environment, both internally and externally, so that you can advance quickly on the stages and the path of yoga. So today I'll be breaking down the yamas and the niyamas for you. So let's get right into it. I wrote a book that's actually about this, but it's for children. It's called The Peacock on the Rock, and there's very easy to understand definitions that I'll actually be referencing through this. And if you wanted to have that as a complementary text, definitely feel free to. But very simply, the yamas are basically the way that you would relate to other people. So sometimes the short form way to understand them is the don'ts, the way you wouldn't behave around a society or in a group. And then, a little more subtle definition would be your restraints of life, your restrictions. So, yamas are basically the things that you would like to kind of avoid doing. So let's start with ahimsa. Ahimsa is a very widely used term in yoga. It simply means just non-violence. And the most obvious thing would be, not to physically, mentally hurt someone, degrade them, neglect them, insult them, that type of behavior. And then, the more subtle form of ahimsa would be sometimes we take advantage of people, and that's a kind of violence. Like if you're, energetically really trying to, push beyond what is harmonious with someone else, that's kind of a subtler form of ahimsa or non-violence. The same thing can happen internally, which is the most common experience that I've seen of ahimsa, is there's a kind of inner rage and inner violence that a lot of people face where they don't need someone else to put them down or insult them. They're perfectly capable of enraging and becoming angry and violent to their own actions, their own inabilities. So ahimsa would definitely relate to how you treat others, and then it also would relate to how you treat yourself. The specific, more literal translation is non-violence. There's I'd say a bit of controversy under if non-violence to some includes not eating animals or fish. My personal take is just to treat an animal with respect and to eat what's medically best for you. If it means, cow liver, then it does. I don't personally take the meaning of ahimsa to include self-neglect in that way, but I definitely am a real fan and advocate of more humanity for the way animals are raised and treated. And if they're not necessary for your nutritional balance, then certainly it's a lower psychic impression to, not take that violent experience into your own body and life. So don't discourage, a diet that's more filled with vegetables or maybe fish. But just to understand the word itself and the Ayurvedic roots are not necessarily to say be a vegetarian, which I encounter a lot in very reputable sources on yoga. And my personal theory on this is that there's a lot of interjection of Hindu philosophy when these texts were translated and spread around the world, But it's open to some debate. I'm just sharing the context, the meanings of the words, and then a lot of yogic terms like this, especially in the yamas and the niyamas, it's up to you to kind of re-explore the definition as to what exactly violence is in your context of it. But that's just the simple and yet complicated overview of what ahimsa is. So non-violence. So next we'll go to satya. So satya is just to be truthful. And this one's much easier to understand, especially when it relates to others. So don't lie, don't deceive. Sometimes leaving out information can be a kind of false way of being. So try as much as possible to be as honest and sincere with your emotional energy. With the internal understanding of satya, satya is basically connecting from your heart to your throat. So your heart chakra is where your emotions reside. Your throat chakra, your vishuddha, is where you communicate it through. And the thing that I constantly encounter, especially amongst women, sorry, women, but we tend to say one thing, but we're feeling another. And if you're like, how are you? I'm fine, what's going on, everything's good, and then there's this whole other inner turmoil, a whole other set of emotional experiences there. So I encourage my students to become truthful in every way, especially in how they communicate their own life experiences to the outside world. So satya is very straightforward, but requires a certain connection into your heart, your emotional center, to really create your own truthfulness of what this word means beyond just the face value, is to get into the heart of your emotional experience. So the third of the yamas is asteya, which is not stealing. This can relate back to ahimsa a little bit, and you'll see that these definitions are kind of, sort of like a tapestry almost woven one next to the other. Not stealing, obviously, don't take something that isn't yours. And then the same thing goes for an energetic feel. So whether it's, plagiarism or taking from an emotional state of another person, taking advantage of them. So just being very cautious to put in your own work, and it will reap its own benefits, and not to try to shortcut to a place that is dishonest. So asteya is not stealing, and again, relating this into your own life is, I'm very guilty of this, by the way, is if there's so many things you want to do and accomplish, sometimes we spread ourselves a little bit thin. And asteya would, also sort of invite you not to deplete your own inner resources of what it is you're trying to do. And you take time away from your sleep to advance in another project, and then you advance, but you're not enjoying it because you're so exhausted. So keeping your rest, your nutrition, these are these are the few really vital pieces of yogic training and understanding that you want to have a more of a balanced situation. So being careful with your energy reserves and not stealing from others. Now the fourth is brahmacharya, which is a focused awareness or understanding. Brahmacharya is the hardest one to understand, mostly because when brahmacharya was originally put out there, not even originally, I mean in modern context, referencing older translations, it tended to relate a lot to sexuality. And some of the first more recent, so the first of the modern yogic traditions, were larger schools of boys, some of them in military training, even sort of like a monkhood kind of establishment. So brahmacharya was kind of like, don't go around sleeping with with everyone all the time. Keep some restraint on where your sexual energy is going to fall. And that could have been for disease prevention and things that were very practical and not so esoteric and subtle. With brahmacharya, so Brahma, the creator, acharya, knowledge of, I translate brahmacharya as a type of focus of your energy. And sexuality is certainly one piece of it. And probably the hardest for many people to reel in is what's motivating them in a sensual or sexual relationship. So brahmacharya would just be to get a handle of it. Don't deplete yourself or be, too, don't deplete yourself, and just make wise choices of what ultimately keeps you more energized through your life. So brahmacharya, a focused awareness, a focused energy, and another way of understanding it is more of a sexual restraint. So that would be the don't exhaust yourself and your primal energy that way. So lastly, this is a funny, not a funny one, but I think living in America, it's one that definitely a lot of Americans, and myself included in that, struggle with, which is aparigraha. So aparigraha just means not to hoard. And hoarding is a very funny thing because, my thing that I'd love to hoard used to be like CDs, and then, CDs don't exist. For those of you that don't know what a CD is, it's like a little mini, plastic disc that you'd insert into this large machine that would play music for you. CD player also included in this lecture on the yamas. But so, whatever you choose to hoard, whether it's seen or unseen, the whole idea is you want to keep your life light. Why carry so much excess stuff around you? If you have clothes you don't need, books you don't need, cooking things that are not necessary for your life, you can definitely have high quality objects. There's no faux pas, please don't use whatever the nicest pen that's in the world. But do you really need 10 of them or 5 of them or 8? I mean, that's up to you. If you're a writer, you might. But ultimately, keeping what you need and not much more than that, and you could save, but hoarding is beyond what's required. And it's also so much like baggage and heaviness to the process of hoarding. So, letting go, not grasping. Another way of understanding aparigraha is an experiential way. So if you are grasping towards something that isn't timed and meant for you, if you are really attached to getting it, that's a type of aparigraha as well, because the attachment is so strong that it's not really a way of living amongst others, in a sense that just if it's going to come to you and you work towards it, then it will. But if you're overly obsessive and reaching and constantly, in that space of overreaching, that's where aparigraha comes in and says, there's no need to do that. Keep what you need, keep your discipline, your work up, without this constant over grasping. So these are the don'ts, and these can be applied to the relationships around you, internally within yourself, the restraints, the things to watch out for.